I'm now driving on the road south of Ranau towards Tambinan, and this leads towards the last POW camp. This is the last camp memorial, which lies on the Ranau to Tambinan road. The site of the last camp itself is in the valley below on the Labuan river. You can get down close to it, which means crossing this rickety old suspension bridge, although it's difficult to go all the way because it's very overgrown. So this is it. This is where it all ended. The human river, which set out from Sandakan in January 1945, finally petered out in the valley below me at what's known as Last Camp. But of course this was no ordinary river. A normal river starts off as a trickle and grows into a strong current, but this river was quite the opposite. And the numbers are quite horrific. Of the 455 who set out on the first march, by the end of June, only 6 were surviving. These were then joined by the survivors of the second march, and 536 had set out in May, but only 183 cadaverous men made it into camp here. So we had 189 who were alive at the end of June. But I'm afraid the rate of deaths continued apace, and by the end of July, 1 month later, there are only 32 left alive in camp. 6 had actually managed to escape, of whom 4 finally made it back to Australia. But the Japanese weren't finished yet, and on the 1st of August, the weakest of the remaining prisoners were taken to a place of execution. Those who couldn't walk were carried, and the others had to crawl there on their hands and knees. But still 15 clung to life, and these were finally murdered on the 27th of August, a full 12 days after the end of the war. And I would also add that of the approximately 1,400 who were left behind in Sandakan, by now they were also all dead. As far as the Japanese were concerned, they'd done a good job. They'd eliminated all of the POWs, and they'd burnt the remaining physical evidence, and as far as they were concerned, there was no evidence against them. After the war, the Japanese troops were all rounded up and were sent to detention centres in Jesselton, Beaufort and Labuan, awaiting further processing. But the camp commandant and his guards believed that they were in the clear and that they would soon be on their way back to Japan. You can imagine their utter consternation when they were suddenly confronted by one of the surviving POWs. To them it was like Lazarus rising from the grave. Warrant Officer Bill Stickpowicz was a very controversial character. It seems that he ingratiated himself to the Japanese and hence received a number of special privileges. He was spared the hard physical labour and he was given extra food rations. And as a result, he was in much better condition than most of the POWs. He was widely loathed by a number of his comrades. Now, he was one of the 4 who successfully escaped from the POW camp here, and he was the first one to make contact with the liberating Allied forces. The other 3 limped into camp some days later in an absolutely terrible condition. They were all repatriated to Australia. Now, when the call went out for witnesses to the Sandakan atrocities, Stickpowicz was the only one who was in sufficient condition to be able to travel. And he came back here for identification of the suspects and to make witness statements which would be used in their trial later. It seems that the limited kindness extended to him by the Japanese came back to bite them at the end of the day. Now, I'm not going to cover the details of the war crimes trials because these have been amply covered in Lynette Silver's book, The Conspiracy of Silence. But I am pleased to say that some of the war criminals were brought to justice, although many escaped, and there were executions and lengthy prison sentences were handed down. And obviously the testimony of Bill Stickperwich and the other escapees was absolutely crucial in this. The Allied policy erred on the side of leniency. The Supreme Commander for this theatre of the war, Lord Louis Mountbatten, was very worried about the damage to Allied prestige if we gave any grounds for the claim of vindictiveness against the defeated Japanese. So that's it then. As I stand above the location of the last POW camp, which is down at the bottom of the valley, we get to the end of the line and the end of the story. And it's a story which has touched me to the core. The brutality of man against man. There is, however, one final link in this chain, and if I possibly can, I will travel there next week to tell the story, but I may be prevented by the movement control order. And a final message for anyone who's watching this video in Britain. This whole incident is hardly known about back home, even though there were 641 British POWs, all of whom perished out here, and none of whom managed to make it back home. Let them not be forgotten, for if they aren't forgotten, their lives were not in vain. This is the ferry to the island of Labuan, which you see in the background. I would very much like to go there to conclude this story, but unfortunately I'm prevented from doing so. After the war, a major effort was made to find and identify the bodies of those who died from the Sandakan episode. And the Commonwealth War Graves Commission sent over a team of investigators, which included Warrant Officer Bill Stickperwich. And they started off looking for the graveyards attached to the former POW camps. They also looked for other informal burial grounds and also for individual burial sites where the individuals were laid to rest where they had died. And a lot of information was provided by the escapees. Major effort was made to identify the human remains, but this proved to be very difficult. The Japanese had made a concerted effort to destroy all records, but they'd also treated the deceased with complete contempt and lack of respect. The decision was made to centralise the graves in one location, and a large site was chosen on the island of Labuan behind me, and the War Graves Commission created a beautiful cemetery there. There are some 3,900 plots. So the Sandakan prisoners who arrived in 2 or 3 large groups, but they died deaths on different dates, different locations, due to different causes, but they were reunited at last and lie together for eternity on Labuan. For me, it's enormously frustrating to haven't been able to visit the cemetery today. It's unfinished business, but I will be back in the future to pay my respects.